Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everybody, welcome. Well, today's show is a little different. So today, I'm the guest, and I have invited my friend and colleague, Ann Sugar, to introduce me and to interview me today. Well, I'm not sure you're really going to introduce me, but you're going to interview me, Ann. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I'm just like rubbing my hands here, getting ready to ask you all the juicy questions.
All right. Well, so a few episodes ago, Ann graciously was one of my guests on the podcast. And after we did that, we just enjoyed our interactions so much. And we've had a number of other conversations with each other. And we thought, wouldn't it be fun if I got to be a guest on my own podcast? Because I've been doing this over a year now, and we felt that it might be really nice for me to have a chance to say a few things about what I think about careers and transitions and other things that are important about our professional lives. And Ann graciously agreed to interview me on those matters. So I'm going to turn it over to Ann now and let her pick my brain.
Yep. I'm going to do my magic. And, I'm really excited to do this because I've never been on the other side, Tammy. One thing I want to introduce to everybody, and you kind of slipped over it a bit, is you've been doing this podcast now for over a year. And while I don't have a podcast, it is a lot of work. And you've done a lot of work, and I think held yourself and everybody else to a really high standard so that everybody's learning and gaining something from it. And I really want to congratulate you for that, because I think that is not said enough. You're giving something to a lot of people out there. And all of those little kernels turn into big ideas and really help a lot of people out there. So I just want to pause and say, congrats. That's a lot of work, Tammy. Congrats.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, wow. This is audio, so no one can see me blushing right now, but thank you. No, that really, that I will take that in. And it is a lot of work, and it requires consistent attention because it is a weekly show. And at the same time, I have to say, I've loved every minute of it. I've been on a huge learning curve, both on the technical side of it and on every side of it, from a content perspective and all kinds of things. And it's been overall, though, a lot of fun. It has never really felt like what we think of when we think of work, like that
Right.
There's some effort involved. The effort has felt effortless, really, because I love it. So I plan on continuing with it. And in terms of all the little pieces that you mentioned that do kind of blossom into some bigger learning, I do want to mention, and this is the first time I am mentioning this on the show, and that is that I'm starting to write a book that will hopefully highlight the learnings that are coming out of the podcast and the various stories that have been told on this show. So that will be coming out later in 2020. So I'm really excited about that, because I think that all the guests that I've had on the show have really demonstrated some really solid themes and through lines about what it takes to make various changes and transitions in your professional life. And I really want to put those together in a volume that can really serve people and inspire them.
Yep. So we're definitely going to talk about your book because I can't wait to hear about that. But I want to take a step back for 1 second and kind of get a little bit into the mechanics of podcasts for a second. What made you want to do a podcast, to start a podcast? And I think you brought up something really important, just as a side note for all of your listeners. It's about consistency,
Mm-hmm.
right? To do it to interview somebody every week. And I said it at the very beginning, and I'm just not going to not stop and pound my fist on the table. That's a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of work showing up every week to be really consistent. But why did you want to start a podcast? I'm curious.
Well, I actually started out thinking about whether I wanted to start blogging or whether to do a podcast. I knew I wanted to
Ah,
start putting out some content, putting out ideas. I was doing a lot of one-on-one coaching, and I wanted to make sure that after close to 20 years of doing this work, that some of the ideas and things that I knew really work for people,
mm-hmm.
those themes and those stories were getting out to a broader, wider group of people. So whether I was going to blog or podcast was sort of the first decision. So I
Okay.
actually sat down with a wonderful woman named Rachel Rice, who actually was my first podcast guest. And she and I had we did some strategy sessions around this. And out of those sessions, I decided that I really did want to go ahead with the podcast rather than just blogging. And so it was honestly, it was a decision from the inside out, let's say.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I really love talking to people, and I love listening to people, and I love asking questions and being curious, and then, you know, listening some more and asking more questions. So it made more sense, I think, to do that kind of a format rather than just writing about these topics, but really getting real life examples of real people and having those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it made perfect sense. The other reason why I decided to do the podcast was that over the last many years, a variety of people kept saying to me from all different parts of my life, and I don't know why they did, but several people said to me, "Have you ever thought about doing radio? You should do radio." I
Ah.
don't know why. So that kind of stuck in me from a variety of different sources. So I started to think, well, maybe I should let my voice be heard out there. So it was a couple of different things that got me going on
Mm-hmm.
this.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so that's kind of how I decided to do it. And then of course, once the decision was made, then I had to figure out, how do you actually make it happen? How do you do
Mm-hmm.
all the technical aspects and get the equipment and deal with
Mm-hmm.
the digital world and all of that? So the decision to do the podcast was one decision, but then all the operational aspects was a whole nother
Right.
ball
Right.
game.
And I think that's really interesting. If you hear something said more than once about your strengths, it's time to sit back and take a pause and really listen, right?
Mhm.
Multiple people told you, you should be on radio, you know. And I think the other thing is that why not, right? You may
Yeah,
not have had the technical skills, you just got to jump in,
yeah,
right? Just
right.
kind of just go for it, right? And
Yeah,
that's part of it too for anything that we do
that's
in
right.
our lives. So, when you think about all of these people that you've interviewed, I have a couple questions about this. What makes, if you were to say to guests and you were to coach them, and this is going to get to your book as well in a kind of circular way. How do you think people should tell their stories?
Mm.
What makes a good story on when somebody's on your podcast? Or if you think of some of your guests that might tell the story a little bit better. what does that look like?
That's a great, great question. I think the first thing that came to mind when you asked that question was when somebody shows up very real, very vulnerable, when they tell me something that might feel very almost raw or personal,
Mm-hmm.
something where they might say to me, I've never told anybody this before, or they might share something with me that was something that really was instrumental in them making a specific pivot point. For
Mm-hmm.
example, somebody who decided they were going to stop drinking, or somebody who had a very serious accident, or somebody who experienced a serious loss in their life, and so some big life experience that they went through that really changed their perspective. And so now some people don't always want to share that. They might
Right.
want to share what they did as a result of that experience, but they might not always want to share that exact experience and how their thought process around that really impacted the actions they took. So I'm always appreciative when they're willing to go a little deeper and share how the impact of that life experience really, spurred them towards some action. I remember the interview I had with you where, we talked about how you graduated from college and your dad said, you should move to New York City, and you were getting ready to go to interviews, and you took some, he gave you some money to go to New York, and you went to New York for interviews and you went shopping.
Yeah.
Now here you are, this, I think very established executive coach, and you might not want everyone to know that when you were younger, you went instead of going for interviews, you went shopping, like maybe you don't care that people know that, but well, clearly you told the story, but that was a very real part of your life, and it definitely had an impact on how you then took some next steps, because eventually you did take a job.
Eventually I did go to that interview. Yes.
Yes. But I mean, I think that to share parts of your life, for people to share parts of their lives where maybe they made a decision, or they, like I said, they had some kind of either dramatic event, or they made a decision that they look back on now and they say, well, maybe I would have done that differently if I, had hindsight or whatever. But those kinds of things where they show up as human and as real makes
Right.
for a great interview.
Right. And I think to add on to that for everybody, just when we think about storytelling can also be about there's a little bit of presentation in this, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And we can have these answers, kind of quote unquote stock answers that we have, right? Like, why did you do this? And you know what you're going to say. But I think what you're also talking about, and for people that are presenting or on a podcast or whatever, there's a bit of just letting it rip,
Mhm.
telling it something, letting a conversation organically happen. So when you're presenting or you're on a podcast, you know, sometimes it's okay to go off the ranch, quote unquote, a bit.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
and that's kind of what I'm hearing from you too, is a little bit about authenticity and going off the ranch.
I do that a lot, actually. Many people before we start the interview or even ahead of time will say, well, tell me what questions you're going to ask. And I will send them a short list of questions, but I make it very clear to them ahead of time that this is really intended to be a conversation. I'm really interested in who they are as a person and how they made decisions along the way. And really, it is about their story. It's not just about what they did and what steps they took. And so I try to really impress upon them that it's not just about, I don't, if I just wanted the steps they took, they could just send me a press release. Right.
Right.
The whole point of doing it this way is to really have that conversation. And so that's why when I say, I love it when they show up as real, or they tell me something that shows up that they say never showed up in any other interview they've ever done before. Or I even, just the other day, actually, I got an email from somebody I interviewed many, many months ago. And she said that she was reflecting on our interview, and there was something that came up in our interview that showed up during her work week. And that point that showed up in our interview showed up while she was doing her work, and that it really helped her, and that she was so grateful for that conversation we had during our podcast interview because it helped move her forward in her work. So, and I don't intend to make these. Yeah. I mean, and I've had people say that to me a few other times where they say that some things in those conversations surfaced for them that they hadn't thought about before or hadn't thought about in a certain way. And while I'm not trying to coach anybody during a podcast interview, I guess I'm always being a little bit of a coach. And so there may be certain kind of self-reflective questions that I ask that get people thinking ways they didn't before. I'm fine with that.
And that really gets into creativity too. But so to get like really tactical about it, what is there a type of question you ask? How do you get people to talk the way you do? So if you have other coaches that are out there listening right now, or other people, you know what, I'm not a good interviewer. I'm not hiring the right people. Like what makes you get people to talk like that? Which is such a special skill.
Why, thank you, Anne. Well,
we're going to get you to take compliments.
I would like to say that I came up with these myself, but I didn't. There's a whole big list of questions that come out of a body of knowledge that I got in my coaching training, my coactive coaching training. They're called powerful questions. And basically what they are is, and there are other sets of questions that are similar to this as well that are out there in the world. But basically what they are questions that are open-ended. They do not elicit a yes, no answer or a one-word answer. So they are questions that when someone answers a question, and let's say a lot of people I interview, for example, will start to tell me about their work history. And they'll say, so I went and I did this, and then I moved to this job, and then I moved to that job. And they kind of gloss over it because they're so close to it. They just kind of, literally slide through about 15 years of their work history. And I'll say, okay, let's back up a little bit. So you went from, I had one person I interviewed who I think you and I both know, went from being a minister to an FBI agent, right? Our friend Chip Massey. So it's like, so tell me, what kinds of things were you thinking when you decided to leave the ministry and become an FBI agent? What were some of the thoughts you had in your head at that time? Rather than asking a question like, well, how did you apply to the FBI? Well, it might be interesting to know how he applied to the FBI, but I would be more interested in knowing what was he thinking that got him to think about even entertaining the idea of joining the FBI. So I'm looking at things like, what were his motivations? What was going on in his sort of psyche? What was propelling him to make that kind of a change in his life? Those are the ways I ask questions. I'm trying to get underneath the surface, not just looking at the actual behavior of the doing, but how was he being with himself? Why? I ask the why questions. That's really what I'm getting at is, what's your why? Why are you doing what you're doing? Not what did you do, but why did you do it? So if I had to really boil it down to anything, it's what's your why, not what's your what.
Oh, I love that. What's your why? What made you do that?
Yeah.
I love that. That is such, it's interesting because why has this very interesting connotation. The subtlety of, so why'd you do that?
Yeah.
Can kind of put people on the defensive a bit, right? But
Right.
if you take it from the perspective of, well, what made you do what you did? Why did you do that? It's
Yes.
a very, such an interesting subtlety there.
Well, you have to have the right tone, right? It's not a
Yes.
judgmental like, why do you do that? It's more like it has to be from a place of openness and curiosity, like, wow, so you started your career here and then you went there. I am fascinated. I am curious. Tell me. You might not even say, why did you do that? You might say, tell me, what were some of your thoughts as you went through the process of deciding to make that transition? What were some of the things that compelled you? So you're still getting at the why, but you're asking the question in different ways. You're coming from a place of deep curiosity, and that's the why.
Yes.
So you're staying open. There's no judgment because it's not for you to judge. You're just trying to understand why somebody made some decisions, and you're trying to understand what they were thinking at the time.
So I love that word about curiosity, right? That curiosity, you're always wanting to learn. You're looking at something from a creative perspective. Might not be my perspective, but that's a really interesting perspective. And I can learn from you
Yeah.
in this way. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, what was kind of like a aha? Because I know you love to learn, Tammy, and I know you love to, and that's part of this podcast, right? And we're going to talk about it, and it's part of the book, right? Is
Yeah.
helping people learn. What's an aha moment learning thing or learning piece or learning something that you got from a guest that you were like, huh, and you want to re-share it with everybody? I'm putting you on the spot.
Yes, you are. What was an aha from a guest? Like I'm thinking about one guest in particular who runs her own business, multiple. She really has sort of several different businesses going on at once. And I didn't realize that, she had been a teenage mother. And I didn't realize that her husband had committed suicide. And, I see her as this like amazing, upbeat, positive, powerful person. And these were things and I felt like I knew her already. But then in the podcast interview, all these pieces of information came out and they just kind of rolled off her tongue. And so I don't know that I had an aha of a learning per se, but I learned some things about her that to me were quite striking that I didn't know. So, it just gave me a whole nother perspective on all the different, twists and turns and challenges of her life and how amazing she is. And I thought she was amazing already. And yeah, and just the the path that she's been on and how brilliant I think she is and how brilliant a businesswoman she is. She's written books and she's done all these things, and that she had a lot of things happen in her life that it could have easily slowed her down, and not landed her where she is now. And so, or at least a lot of other people who would have been on similar paths would not have been where they are. So, but here's a aha. It's not from a guest per se. It's from an accumulation of guests.
Oh, I like this.
So I started the podcast assuming that I was going to be interviewing a lot of people who are happy, satisfied, and fulfilled with what they're doing here and now today. And that they were all going to be telling me their stories of that they either started or had previously been in situations that were far less satisfying and fulfilling, and how they had to be somewhat miserable and unhappy in order to move into something far more satisfying and meaningful. And as it turns out, as I've been going forward and either finding guests or guests finding me, and it's been both, most of the people who have become guests on the podcast were not completely unhappy and miserable before they found the thing that they are doing now that is more meaningful and fulfilling. They were already doing something that mattered to them, and there were things about it they wanted to change, but they weren't downright deeply unhappy. They just had some things they wanted to change. And so I had this big assumption when I started that really hasn't come to fruition at all. So that's been my biggest aha, I will say.
Wow. So it's kind of that's a really interesting kind of misconception, right? That you have to be
in my own experience, actually, because I myself in my earlier career had several periods of time where I was deeply unhappy in certain jobs and certain employment situations I was in. So I figured, and I found my way to something that I love to do. So I figured I was going to interview all these other people who had equal amounts of unhappiness and found their way to happiness like I did. Not true. And not to say that there aren't other people out there like me. There are. But those aren't the people who somehow are finding their way to being interviewed on my podcast.
That's really interesting that, there's all different flavors and times in our lives where you don't have to be lying on the ground, sobbing and wailing that you're really unhappy. It can be just something small. And going back to that one guest who has multiple businesses and she's gone through a lot in her life, it just sounds to me, one thing that you're saying, not to put words in your mouth, but it's about doing little bits of action, right? That doing a little bit of action, you could, interestingly enough, Tammy, I'm not saying this is you, but you could have sat and researched doing this podcast for a whole year and researched one part of the whole technical piece that you didn't know about. But it's really about just kind of jumping in, doing something, right? Just doing something, even if you're not lying on the ground in misery, just always be doing something. It sounds like.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing from
Well, I will tell you, I decided to do the podcast, and it did take me about a year and a half before I actually launched it. I will.
Wow.
But it wasn't because I was trying to make everything perfect before I launched. That is definitely not the case. But I was busy. I was busy working. I was busy running my practice and doing all kinds of other things. And I did want to understand some of the moving parts that need to be put in place to run a podcast. But it wasn't from a place of perfection. It was just a combination of life, work, and then definitely wanting to have some things lined up and ready to go. And so it did take me a little longer than I wanted it to, but it did take quite a while before I launched.
Yeah, but here you are. So let's.
Oh yeah.
I want to jump into. So you're jumping into writing a book.
Yes, that is more of a leap, I will say. Yeah.
Oh, I hardly think so. But so tell me about what made you want to start writing this book.
Well, I've had it on my mind for a long time to write a book like this, writing about people's stories of making career or professional transitions. And I'd say last year sometime I decided that 2020 was the year. And then in November, I just sort of put my stake in the ground and declared it. And once I said it out loud, I realized, gulp, I guess I'm doing it.
Yeah.
So I've just started the process. And what makes me want to do it, I literally feel like there's a book inside of me.
Ah.
There's all this material and information and advice and themes and ideas that I think would be really helpful to a variety of people that I really want to put into some kind of volume or vessel people can have in their hands or on their computers or their Kindles or whatever. And that will also be accessible and practical, but also inspiring. That will inspire people to go from wherever they are now to a place that's going to be better for them or a place of greater clarity for them. I'm imagining that the people who will benefit most from this book will be people who are looking to find a more grounded, clearer place in their lives, whether it's because they're looking for the next professional move, or maybe they're even looking to slow down a little bit. Maybe they're empty nesters and they're thinking, I've worked 30 plus years. I still want to work, but I'm looking for the next thing. Maybe not even a big full-time thing, but I want to kind of establish myself in some different way. But I want to kind of have some key guiding principles to walk through that can get me thinking through how to get there. And I want to do it in a way where I really honor who I am through that process. And really build on what my preferences are rather than just saying, well, I'm good at this, so that's what I'll do. And so reflecting on stories from either past clients or probably more often podcast guests and their stories as examples, along with key principles that have come up throughout the podcast, that will probably be what's threaded throughout the book, and then some real hands-on exercises that people can do.
I'm really biased to practicality, so because that's what is, and I always like to say, so what's one thing you would do? So Tammy, if for everybody out there thinking about the guiding principles that you're starting to form and the exercises, what's one thing that everybody can do right now? If I'm starting to think about a career change, I'm an empty nester, I'm putting you on the spot here, Tammy. What's one thing you would tell everybody to do right now? One action.
Find at least one person to be a thinking partner with in this process, whether it be a trusted friend, colleague, maybe a coach. Just do not think you're going to do this all alone. Even though this is about you and your life, don't do it alone.
I love that. And I think I have a bias I do have a bias. By growing up in advertising, everything is team-based. Ideas are team-based. Advertising programs are team-based. I think you really, that's such a brilliant point. Having, it could just even be an accountability partner or just a friend that you go have a coffee with once in a while.
That's right.
It doesn't have to be this big formalized book club of we're going to read these books about career change, blah, blah, blah. Just a simple practicality of that. Oh, Tammy.
Well, I would say two things. Don't do it alone and buy my book when it comes out.
Absolutely. I can't wait.
But I would say, really, too often, in my coaching practice, people come to me and they've been trying to do it all alone, especially here in the US. We have such an emphasis on individuality and independence. And there's a real downside to that. And that is that we get lost in our own little bubbles. And we really lose sight of the value of having somebody or something to bounce things off of. It's not about having someone else tell us what to do or advise us even. It's just when we try to do something alone, we definitely get lost and we lose focus. And having another person to share some ideas with, to talk with, and maybe get another perspective on things, it definitely helps us to move forward. No doubt about it.
Completely agree. So here's one of my last questions here. For people out there that they really, I think that you brought up something that will resonate or does resonate with a lot of people. I have a book in me. And it goes back to the very beginning when we talked about action, right? And just doing something. And you just did your podcast and doing it consistently. All these little tidbits that we talked about today. What if I'm somebody that I have a book in me, I don't even know where to start? What's one thing you would tell people to do to start that writing process of a book?
Well, I'll tell you what I was told to do.
Okay.
I was told to start a habit. Start the habit of writing. Sit down every day or Monday through Friday and just start writing. It doesn't have to even be about the topic you're writing about. Just start the habit of writing. I was told to start a half an hour a day.
Mm-hmm.
And, if this is something you really, truly want to do, you will start doing that. Now, was I perfect at it when I started writing? Absolutely not. And it doesn't even have to be full sentences. Some days when I sit down and write, I write in bullet points.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes I just write bullet points or I start with a list of words and then build sentences off the words.
Mm-hmm.
There's no one right way to write. If you want some guidelines for writing, there's lots of great books out there on how to develop a writing practice. I mean, there's some old standbys like Writing Down the Bones, I think is a standby book, right? Is it Natalie Goldberg, I think is her name?
I think, yep.
And then Julia Cameron, right?
Artist's Way.
The Artist's Way, writing your morning pages. So there's tons of resources out there for, or Google, how to start a writing practice. But that's what I was told to do. And then, of course, there are other great resources out there in terms of how to write a book. But I think the first step is just starting a writing practice.
I completely agree. I think the other book that kind of, I think, marries to what you're talking about is Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott.
Mm-hmm.
It's about just every day, just sitting down. It doesn't have to be 1,000 words.
Right.
250 words, whatever it is.
Yep.
Just make it a habit and write.
And whatever works for you. Like I know some people who are writing books who commit themselves to a certain number of words per day. If you're kind of a quantitative person and that works for you, fine. If, for some people it might be a number of minutes. For someone else it might be something else. So, again, it's the habit, developing the habit that counts. At least that's how I see it. So, and I also think it's got to feel good most of the time. If it doesn't feel good, then, you have to pay attention to that too. This isn't a have to. This has to be a want to most of the time. Right. So even if it doesn't feel good every day, but it's something that in your heart of hearts you want to do, follow that feeling. But if you're starting to feel like it just feels like an obligation every day, notice that as well.
Yep. And I think one thing that we haven't really talked about is the marriage of a podcast and a book.
Mm-hmm.
You being able to tell all these stories, hear all these stories, just helps with your storytelling and writing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or testing out the ideas, for guests too, testing out ideas and stories.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of, I think, marriage of podcasts and books somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I see it that way.
Yeah. I mean, I actually think that there may be, a second book out of this as well. I think
Oh, wow.
I'm imagining possibly something else coming out of this. I'm not quite sure yet, but every once in a while the idea starts to divide into two. So we will see. We will see. Or an online course that might come out of it to help support people through the process, or a book and then maybe a workbook, something like that. So, but the idea being to not just inspire people, but again, like we said, practical, give people the practical tools they need that will support them to take the steps they need through the process. I'm all about, as much as I love when people dream about a dream job or a dream vocation, I'm all about the practical at the same time. And I believe that people can have both. I really do. So,
oh, you do. That's really, that it doesn't have to be one or the other.
no, I don't believe in all or nothing. I believe in both.
A little of both sprinkled in.
Yeah, definitely. Like a good recipe.
Well, I can't wait to read your book, Tammy.
Well, I can't wait for you to read it, Anne.
So let me ask you, any parting words about being on a podcast that you want to share, or something that, we didn't get to talk about today in terms of learning, or your podcast or your book? What do you think?
I think the one thing that I would say is, I actually say this at the end of every podcast. I would say, watch your assumptions. Never assume that something is not possible. I would never have imagined myself doing something like this, really. And here I am doing it. Here you and I are talking. We're going to put this out there to whomever wants to listen. And I'm grateful to those who are listening. And just watch your assumptions. Don't assume something's not possible. Really, almost anything is possible within reason, but
Yep.
But
yes,
there's a lot of things that are possible if you really just give yourself a moment or a chance to make it happen in one form or another.
That is a great way to end. Anything is possible.
Yeah.
And don't assume that it's not.
Right. Because you know what happens when you assume.
Yes, I do. Well, Tammy, it's great talking to you today. It's been really interesting for me to be on the other side and ask questions. And you've been an amazing guest. So
thank you, Anne. And you've been an amazing interviewer. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate your generosity in offering to do this. And I loved your questions, and it's really been fun. Thank you.
Good. My pleasure. We'll do it again someday.
All right. I hope you enjoyed this special episode with Anne Sugar interviewing me. It was so much fun to turn the tables and be asked the questions this time. What is your key takeaway from our conversation? Is there something you'll put into action that you'll benefit from for years to come? Share what resonated with you in the show notes at workfromtheinsideout.com. Look for episode 073. That's also where you'll find all the links and resources from today's podcast. If you enjoyed this episode with Anne and myself, please share it with your friends and colleagues, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. Are you enjoying the podcast? I'd love to read your review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find through my website at www.tammygoularloeb.com/podcast. Just click on the Apple Podcast button or follow the instructions provided there. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. And who knows, maybe you'll be my next interview on this podcast. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.